Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving right into the epic history of Germany. We are looking at a completely fascinating journey that spans over 2,000 years, tracing this massive, overarching struggle between regional fragmentation on one hand and aggressive, centralized unification on the other. It's really the story of how an incredibly diverse group of people managed to forge such a complex, modern identity. To make sense of this massive story without getting lost in a sea of dates, we're going to navigate through 5 distinct eras. Tribes in the First Reich, faith, fracture, and Prussia, forged in blood and iron, world wars and division, and finally, a reunited modern identity. To make sure we're uncovering the real facts, we're grounding our entire journey in some highly authoritative sources. We'll be drawing heavily from Mary Fulbrook's highly acclaimed Concise History of Germany, along with some brilliant syntheses from Cambridge University scholars. Let's pull back the curtain and really examine this historical push and pull of the German character. All right, let's jump straight into part 1, Tribes and the First Reich. This takes us from Roman rivals all the way to the Holy Roman Empire. You know, people often misunderstand the Holy Roman Empire as this chaotic, failed state, but it actually functioned remarkably well for hundreds of years. It operated as a totally unique two-tier system known as Kaiser und Reich, meaning an emperor and an empire. Instead of being a rigid, strict nation-state like we think of today, it was actually a community built entirely on cooperation, consensus, and compromise among hundreds of local principalities. Now, this was a slow, deliberate transformation. We start way back with disparate Germanic tribes famously repelling the Romans at the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD. Then we see the division of the massive Frankish Empire in 843. And finally, by 9062 AD, Otto I is crowned the first Holy Roman Emperor. What this era did was establish a deeply ingrained, centuries-long habit of federalism. Which brings us to part 2, Faith, Fracture, and Prussia. Here, we see the pendulum swing violently toward division. The real spark here was the Protestant Reformation, kicked off by Martin Luther in 1517. It completely fractured the empire. Suddenly, a stark geographic and cultural divide emerged. You had a Protestant North and East directly colliding against a fiercely Catholic South and West. This religious schism profoundly eroded the old feudal order and totally tested the empire's ability to maintain that consensus we were just talking about. And the consequences of this fracture? Absolutely monumental. It culminated in the catastrophic 30 Years' War, lasting from 1618 to 1648, which brought unimaginable destruction across the entire Holy Roman Empire. The resulting Peace of Westphalia fundamentally changed the map, officially granting autonomy to regional estates. Out of the ashes of this conflict, we witnessed the dramatic rise of powerful regional rivals, most notably Austria and the Kingdom of Prussia. So the crucial question we really have to ask right now is, how did this heavily decentralized network of rival states suddenly transform into an aggressive, unified empire on the world stage? How do you go from hundreds of autonomous territories to a singular, dominant powerhouse? Well, the answer is found in Part 3, Forged in Blood and Iron, focusing on Bismarck's centralized unification. The 19th century completely rewrote the map of Europe. In 1806, Napoleon Bonaparte effectively dissolved the 1,000-year-old Holy Roman Empire, creating a massive power vacuum. After his defeat, a loose German confederation was established in 1815. But it was Prussia, under the highly calculated leadership of Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, that stepped up to dominate. Bismarck used a ruthless mix of diplomacy and military force to establish a newly unified German empire in 1871. But Bismarck didn't just want new borders. He wanted total internal control. To forge this Second Reich, he implemented strict, highly polarizing domestic policies. A prime example is the Kulturkampf, a targeted, aggressive campaign meant to suppress the political and social influence of the Catholic Church. Bismarck was demanding singular, absolute loyalty to the new state, forcefully sweeping away all those old traditions of regional compromise. Tragically, this sets the stage for Part 4, World Wars and Division, marking a profound descent into catastrophe. This newly unified, heavily militarized power drastically deviated from Western political traditions, which triggered a grim sequence of events. The German Empire led the Central Powers into World War I, resulting in a crushing defeat and the punishing Treaty of Versailles. Following that, the fragile Weimar Republic was absolutely crippled by economic collapse. All of this provided highly fertile ground for Adolf Hitler to exploit national resentment and establish the absolute totalitarian dictatorship of the Nazi regime in 1933. The regime's extreme anti-Semitism, its eugenics programs, and its aggressive territorial expansion triggered the devastation of World War II. It also resulted in the Holocaust, a horrific, systematic genocide. 11 million people were murdered by the Nazi regime, including 6 million Jews. It is a profoundly dark period of history that permanently scarred the globe.
Following total defeat in 1945, the nation's territory was shrunk and partitioned by the Cold War. Germans suddenly found themselves living in two radically opposed realities. Over in the West, the Bonn Republic became a NATO-aligned parliamentary democracy that experienced this incredibly rapid economic miracle. Meanwhile, in the East, the German Democratic Republic operated as a Warsaw Pact-aligned totalitarian communist dictatorship with a state-run economy and a heavily surveilled population.
Yet this stark division actually sparked an incredible philosophical shift. As historian Wolfgang J. Mumsen points out, the post-war era in West Germany really marked the beginning of a long journey back to the cooperative Western traditions they had abandoned during their aggressive expansionist phase. It was a conscious, nationwide rejection of their totalitarian past. Which leads us right to our final chapter, Part 5, A Reunited Modern Identity and the Return to Consensus. The sudden collapse of the Eastern Bloc in 1989 completely shifted the global landscape overnight. The Berlin Wall was opened, leading just a year later in 1990 to the official reunification of East and West Germany. Now, this presented the absolutely monumental task of merging two vastly different societies, one shaped by decades of democratic capitalism and the other by generations of state-run socialism. But if we look at modern Germany today, we see a nation that has decisively rejected the aggressive centralization of the 19th and 20th centuries. Instead, they've embraced a model that feels surprisingly familiar. They've returned to the consensus-building and cooperative federalism that actually characterized the original Holy Roman Empire. They've championed Franco-German friendship, become a founding member of the Eurozone, and dedicated themselves deeply to European political integration. Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. As Europe navigates its own modern political and economic challenges, could Germany's hard-won historical lessons of compromise and cooperation be exactly what the continent needs to thrive? By embracing the best parts of its distant, cooperative past while fully acknowledging its fractured history, Germany just might be drawing the map for the future of Europe. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.